Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos, Daf Tzadik Dalet. We're at the Mishnah on Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis, 6 lines from the bottom. It says the Mishnah, Hamoitzi oichen, pachos mikashir bekli. If one should carry out food less than the shear, less than the prescribed amount, which is a gergeres, a dried fig. So if he takes out food which contains less volume than a dried fig, and he takes it out in a kli, says the Mishnah, not only is he potter for the food since it has less than a shear, potter af ala kli, he's also potter for carrying out the container. Why? Says the Mishnah, sha'akli tfeilolei, because the container is secondary to the content. We don't view the container as a separate entity, as though he's carrying it out separately. It is together, it is a combined masa yitzah on the content and the kli. And since the kli is merely there to protect, to contain the content within, it is secondary to the content. It is tafel. And if he's potter for the content, for the oichel, he's going to be potter for the kli as well. Continues the Mishnah, a similar halacha. Es achai b'mita. If one carries out a living person in a bed, potter afalamita. Not only is he potter for carrying out the living person, as Rashi will explain, because chayno says atzmai, because he lightens himself. Rashi will explain. So not only is he potter for carrying out this living person, he's also potter on the bed. Why? For the same reason. Potter afalamita shamita tfeilolei, because the bed is secondary and subordinate to the person within, and is not reckoned as a separate ma'aseh yitzah, so it's merely a tafel to the primary object here, which is the person. If he's potter for the person, he's potter on the bed as well. Continues the Mishnah, es hameis b'mita. What if he carries out a corpse, a dead person in a bed? Chayav, he is chayav because he intends on removing the tumah from his rishus. It's considered to be a chashav, a significant act of carrying, and therefore he's chayiv. Not only an entire mace, even a small portion, a kazayis volume of a mace, which has the ability to be metame, and therefore that is also considered to be a hitzah chashuva, and he is chayiv. And not only that, because kazayis minan avela, of a dead animal, a small portion of a sheretz, the size of a lentil, for instance, of a dead lizard, chayav, because he is ridding himself of this tumah, and therefore it's considered to be a hitzah chashuva, as Rashi says. So this is the shita of Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon Poiter, Shimon says, if he removes tumah from his domain, he's not chayav, because he doesn't need this object out there in Shisarabim. His intention is merely to get rid of this tumah. That is considered to be a melacha she'eina tzricha legufa. It's not needed for its own sake. It's merely done he's doing it as a means to get rid of this tumah. It's not serving a positive objective, and therefore, according to Reb Shimon, he's going to be potter. Let's take a look at Rashi inside. From the beginning of the Mishnah, which is 19 lines from the bottom up in Rashi, begins Rashi as achai b'mita. V'chai lo mechayev ala tzasei. So if one carries out a living person in the bed, he is potter on the person and on the bed. Why? Says Rashi, v'chai lo mechayev ala tzasei. One is not liable for carrying out a living person, who mekel atzmai, because he lightens himself. That is the nature of things. The person, when being carried, lightens himself somewhat, v'noisi atzmai, and somewhat carries himself. And therefore, that is not regarded as a standard, as a typical load, and therefore there's no chiyuv on carrying out this living person. Continues Rashi, v'chein kazayis min hameis chayav im hoitzi. Why? The hoyel umetame, since this kazayis has the ability to transfer tumah, hoitzo chashuvi, it's a significant act of carrying lahatz asr min tumah, to protect oneself, to save oneself from tumah. Reb Shimon Poiter, afilu b'meis shalim, even when carrying an entire mace, davim malacha she'ena tzricha lugufa. It's not needed for its own sake. He's carrying it out not because he needs it elsewhere, because he doesn't want it here. V'chol malacha she'ena tzricha lugufa ella l'salka ma'alav, to get rid of it. Have malacha she'ena tzricha lugufa. Why? The b'ritzoyne lo ba'alai. If it was up to him, he would never have had this thing here. He didn't need it. Hilkoch lav melechas machshevasi. Shimon holds This is not included in the term melechas machshavas. Melechas machshavas means doing an act of a malacha of crafting something, designing something, doing something positive. But doing a malacha simply for the sake of avoiding a problem, removing an issue, getting rid of a tumah, that's not considered to be melechas machshavas, and therefore he is patur. So in summary, we have two concepts learned in our Mishnah. First thing regarding ikar and tafel, and then we went on to the halacha of removing tumah, which according to the Tanna Kamma is considered to be a malacha. According to Reb Shimon, it is not. Continues the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, we learn in the Brayso. Ha-moitzi oichlan kashir. What if one carries out oichlan, which contain the proper volume, and it is in a kli, im bekli, so if it's in a container, says the Brayso, chayav al oichlan, upater al kli. He's chayav for carrying out the food, but he's patur on the kli because the kli is tafel. Once again, it is secondary, subordinate to the content. There's no separate chiv on the kli. However, says the Brayso, v'im hoya kli tzarich lei. What if he especially needed this kli out there in Shesarabim? Chayav af ala kli. Then indeed he's chayav twice on the oichlan and on the kli. Says the Gemara, shma mina. Apparently, oichel shnei zeisei chelev behelam echad chayav shtayim. Apparently, we learn from here, just as you just told me, that if one repeats the same malacha of Eitzah taking place twice, one on the oichlan, one on the kli, will result in two chiyuvim, even though they both took place in one helim, in one lapse of awareness. He didn't become aware of his malacha until he completed both of them. He's chayiv two karbanos. Apparently, in the case where a person is oichel shnei zeisei chelev, a person eats two kazesim of chelev, forbidden fats, be'elam echad, in one lapse of awareness. Chayiv shtayim. He is chayiv two karbanos, and we know that that's not the case. When a person repeats the same avera, same sin twice, in one helam, he's only chayiv once. Says the Gemara, Amr Rav Sheshes, Hachab Ma'askina was speaking about when he took out the food, he was shaygig. It was done inadvertently. But regarding the kli, it was done intentionally. He knew that it was a malacha. So therefore, when the Brayso tells us he's chayiv on the oichlan, it's referring to a chayiv chatos due to the shaygig involved. When the Brayso tells us he's chayiv on the kli, the Brayso is referring to skila. Chayiv means a capital punishment due to the malacha b'mezid. So indeed, of course, there will never be two chatois on a malacha which was repeated behelam echad. We're speaking about a chatas and misa. Maskav la Rav Ashi. How could you say that is the interpretation of the Brayso? V'ha afal kli katani. The Brayso uses words which seem to be implying that he's bringing two chatois, not only on the oichlan, afal kli, on the container as well. He will bring a chatas. It seems like we're speaking about the same liability, the same chiyuv. You can't say one is a carbon, one is a misa. El Amar Vashi. We're speaking about, for instance, kigoy sheshogag bezeh bezeh. Indeed, it was inadvertent on both accounts, on the food and on the utensil. However, he became aware of one of them, so he did them both together. Then he had a yediyah, a knowledge, an awareness on one of those two things, and then only afterwards, afterwards, he became aware of the second thing as well. And we know that Rabbi Yochanan holds, we learned this earlier in Daf Ayin Aleph, that yediyos machalkos, the fact that he became aware of one avera before the other one, that splits them into two and requires two separate karbanos. Ubeplukta, this discussion here indeed is dependent on the machlekes, the Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Lakish, which Rabbi Yochanan is the one who holds that yediyos are machalkos, Mishum Lakish holds yediyos are not machalkos. So this discussion between Rav Ashi, who tells us that the interpretation of the Brayso is based on this concept of yediyos machalkos, and Rav Sheshes, who avoided this approach, is apparently dependent on that machlekes, meaning that Rav Sheshes doesn't subscribe to that shita of yediyos machalkos, therefore he opted to avoid that interpretation. However, Rav Ashi does hold of that shita of yediyos machalkos, and therefore he interpreted the Brayso accordingly. So in summary, if one is moitzi oichlin pachas mikashir, in a kli. The Mishnah tells us he's pater on the oichlin and pater on the kli. The Brisa continues and tells us that if he is moitzi oichlin kishir in a kli, he's chayav on the oichlin and pater on the kli. What if he needs the kli? He's tzarech. The Brisa says he's chayav. We have two interpretations. Either we're speaking about that he was amazing on the kli and he's chayav skila, or according to Rav Ashi, he had a yediyah on one of the two things, on either the oichlin or the kli, and then afterwards had another yediyah on the second item. And yediyah some machalkos, it splits things into two, and it needs to be a separate carbon for each one. Continues the Gemara. As a chay b'mita, what if one carries out a living person in a bed patur afal mita? Not only is he patur on the chay, he's also patur on the mita, because the mita is a tafel. Says the Gemara, leima mastis and Rabbi Nosson ivla Rabbanan. Should we suggest that our Mishnah is following Rabbi Nosson's shita and not the Rabbanon? It is Rabbi Nosson who says that a chay is not considered to be a mas, a load. The Sani is willing to the Brisa. Hamoitzi behema chaya v'oif l'shas harabim. If one carries out a behema, domestic animal chaya v'oif, a fowl l'shas harabim, bein chayim bein shchutin, whether alive or whether slaughtered, chayav is considered to be a load. Rabbi Nosson Omer al shchutin chayav. I agree. If it is shachat, he is chayav. It's considered to be a load. However, ba'al chayim, if they are alive, pater shachai noiseis asmai, because a living creature, a living thing, carries itself. It lightens itself. So Tosfos discusses the source of chai noiseis asmai. So the point here is not the fact that it's light as opposed to being heavy. The point is that the living thing lightens its load. It's not your typical load, which is dead weight. Something which is alive, it lightens itself. It lifts itself slightly. Therefore, says Tosfos, it's not typical. It's not similar to the loads carried in the Mishkan, in the Midbar, and therefore, it doesn't have the status of a standard load, and there's no chiv. So this again is Shitas Rav Nosson, who tells us that if one carries a behemah chay v'oif, which are still living, he's pater. Apparently, says the Gemara, our Mishnah is following Rav Nosson and not the Rabbanon, who don't seem to hold this svara. Amar Rava, afilu teim Rabbanon. Our Mishnah could be following even the Rabbanon. Ad kan leplig Rabbanon, olei the Rav Nosson. Rabbanon only disagreeing with Rav Nosson. Ela bebehema chayav v'oif. By these creatures, the misharbetin afshayu, because the Rabbanon hold they actually make themselves heavy. They struggle, try to get away from the person, so they weigh themselves down. You can't apply the concept of chai noiseis asmai, that a living thing lifts himself and carries himself. Quite the contrary, they weigh themselves down. Aval adam chai, but a living person, the noiseis asmai, who certainly lightens himself, he lifts himself slightly. I feel the Rabbanon moidu. Even the Rabbanon will agree that there's no chiv of eitzah because chai noiseis atzmai. So indeed, our Mishnah is discussing a living person, where even the Rabbanon agree there's no chiv because the living person lightens himself, lightens the load somewhat, and is not considered to be a standard masui, and there's no chiv. Omalei Rav Ada bar Ava l'Rav v'hodasnan. Now let's take a look at the following Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Agudath Israel, telling us that one may not sell any animals which are meant for labor, for doing malacha. You can't sell to a non-Jew. The Gemara tells us there's this concern of she'ela schirus, because perhaps he might lend it to the guy, loan it to the guy, and he might use it on Shabbos, and we know that a person is obligated, has a chiyuv to have his animals rest from labor on Shabbos as well. Says the Mishnah, b'mesera mater b'sus. B'mesera allows a person to sell a horse. Why? Metani will in the Brisa. B'mesera mater b'sus. Why? Mipnei shu oisu b'melacha shein chayav n'olav chatas. Because a horse is designated for accommodating a rider. Now, a rider is not considered to be a true malacha. As Rashi says, it's not a malacha d'oraisa, and therefore it's not considered to be one of those things that a person needs to ensure that his animal rests from. And therefore, B'Mesera says that a person can sell a sus, a horse, to a guy, because the work that a horse is involved in is not a malacha. It's not a malacha shechayav n'olav chatas. So that's the shita of B'Mesera. Now let's take a look further. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ben Beseira, so this opinion of Ben Beseira, who exempts a sus from the prohibition of selling a behema to a guy, Ben Beseira Rabbi Nosson, Amar Davar Echad. They both are one and the same. Ben Beseira's reason and Rabbi Nosson's reasoning are alike. They're both aligned with each other. Ben Beseira, we just said that the horse is not performing a malacha by accommodating its rider, and Rabbi Nosson, who holds as well that a person, a chai, is noises atzmoi. He's not considered to be a load. Now, vi amris, deloy pligi rabbanon olei de Rabbi Nosson. Now, if you maintain that this was Rava who told us that rabbanon agree when it comes to a living person, it's not considered to be a load. He is noises atzmoi. So the Gemara is challenging Rav. Vi amris. Now, if you say deloy pligi rabbanon olei de Rabbi Nosson elo bebehema chayav oif, if you maintain that Rabbanon only disagrees with Rabbi Nosson in a particular area when it comes to behema to chayav oif, because because they weigh themselves down, they struggle to get away and they weigh themselves down. However, a person, by a person, we certainly apply the concept, the formula of chayin. It says atzmoi. And this horse that is accommodating his rider, it's not considered to be carrying the rider. It's not really a masli. It's not really a load, even according to the Rabbanan, because chayin says atzmai. Says the Gemara, if so, my area ben Beseira of Rabbi Nosson. So why did the Gemara have to pair together ben Beseira who exempts a horse, since it's merely intended to for accommodating a rider, where there's no Issa Deraisa involved, there's no Malacha Deraisa, because he's not a Masoi, he's not carrying a load. Why did you have to pair together Ben Beseira of Rav Nosson? My iri Ben Beseira of Rav Nosson. And you align both of them together. You said Ben Beseira and Rav Nosson are aligned with each other. They both subscribe to this chiddush that a person is not considered to be a load. For Amris, but haven't you said Afilu Rabbanan Maidu? Even the Rabbanan agree, they can see that when it comes to a person, we apply the rule of Chayin says Atzmai. So even the Rabbanan would agree that a horse is not involved in Malacha because he's merely accommodating a rider, which is a person. Says the Gemara, Ki Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Indeed, you're right. If a horse is accommodating a person who is riding on top of it, he's not doing a Malacha. Why then did Rav Yochanan need to pair together Ben Beseira, who exempts a horse, and Rabbi Nosson specifically, as opposed to the Rabbanan? Because we're speaking about a very specific type of horse. Ki Amar Rabbi Yochanan besus hamiyuchad la'oifos, a sus which is designated for carrying fowl, birds, and when it comes to birds, according to Rabbanan, at least, we don't apply the concept of Chayin Yosef Atzmai, which is specific only to a human being. Says the Gemara, is it such a phenomenon of a horse which is especially designated for carrying oifos? Says Gemara, yes. We have this horse which is used by the Bei Vayadon. Rashi says these are the Tzayadi oifos, those bird trappers who would carry some of these wild bird nates and these type of birds who were these hunting birds which helped them in their hunting. So indeed, Rabbi Yochanan, when he pairs together Ben Beseira with Rabbi Nosson specifically, he's referring to a horse, even a horse which is designated for carrying oifos. And in that case, certainly the Rabbanan disagree. They hold that it's considered to be a load. It's only a human being riding on a horse where we apply the concept of Chayin says Atzmai. He's not considered to be a load. But if there's anything other than a human being on this horse, it's considered to be a load. So therefore, when Ben Beseira is matir b'sus, he allows all types of horses to be sold to a guy. Even this horse, which is designated for the oifos, to ride on it. Apparently, he's following Rabbi Nosson Shita, who maintains that even when it comes to other creatures, we apply the concept of Chayin says Atzmai. Therefore, this horse is not performing any malacha because the creature above it is not a load, and therefore he maintains one may sell it to a guy. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Umayde Rabbi Nosson bekafos. Rabbi Nosson will agree that when it comes to something which is tied up, we don't apply the concept of chainoises atzmai. Something which is tied up doesn't have the ability to even lift himself slightly to lighten the load, and therefore we treat it as a ordinary standard load, and if one should carry it out, he's chayiv. And Tosfos says actually even a tinik ben yoime, a one-day-old baby, would fall into this category. Other Rishonim say even up to 8 days old. Others say even if he's as long as he's not old enough to be able to walk through even by holding and assisting him, he doesn't have the ability to walk at all. It falls into this category of kafas. Apparently, up to that point, he doesn't have the ability to lighten himself and to be noiseis atzmai. So Reb Nosson will agree in this specific case. Amalei, Reb Ada bar Masna Abaye. V'ha, hani parsoi, the commander kefisi dami. Now, these Persians, Rashi says, were wrapped up in bgadim, rechavim, wide garments. They're finicky. They conduct themselves with heaviness and slow-moving people. So, these people, says the Gemara, if they're sitting on a horse, we should give them the status of a kafas, of somebody who's tied up, who doesn't have the ability to lift himself and lighten himself. Once again, v'hani parsei, these Persians, the commander kefisi dami, they can be regarded as though they're tied up. Nevertheless, v'amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Beseira, v'Reb Nosson aber davar. Let's go back to the equation that Rabbi Yochanan presented for us, that ben Beseira, who allows selling any type of horse to a guy without any concern of malacha being performed with that horse on Shabbos, because a horse is going to be carrying, the Gemara said, either a person or even a bird, where according to Ben Meseira, there is no chiva, there's no malacha there, because chainosis atzmai, and indeed it is aligned with Reb Nosson, who holds as well that a creature sitting on something else is not considered to be a load, chainosis atzmai. Says the Gemara, but this horse being sold to the non-Jew, perhaps was speaking about selling it to a Persian, who's considered to be tied up kafas. Now when he sits on this horse, he's considered to be like a masa, like a load. So how can that be allowed? Even according to Reb Nosson, that shouldn't be allowed. Again, v'hani parsoi, these Persians, the commander kefisi dami, who are regarded as tied up, v'amar Rabbi Yochanan. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan tells us, ben Beseira, who allows selling a horse to any type of non-Jew, even a Persian, for Reb Nosson, amar david echad. So they're following the same line of reasoning. But Beseira is aligned with Reb Nosson, who holds chainosis atzmai. But how can you apply that to a Persian? Says the Gemara, it's by choice. When the Persian conducts himself with heaviness and is all finicky, hasam ramas rucho denakatlu. They're being gripped by haughtiness, but certainly they have the full ability to run, to walk. They're not considered to be tied up, and therefore certainly the formula of chainosis atzmai applies to them. It only doesn't apply to somebody who's actually tied up. These people are not actually tied up. Says the Gemara, I'll prove it to you. The ahu paradashcha, this Persian official, the rasach malki iluvei. So the king got mad at him, and as a result, he took off and ran. V'roit tlosa parsi bekari. He ran 3 parsois by foot. So apparently, he has the ability full well to run if he chooses to do so. Therefore, technically speaking, they do not fall to the category of something tied up, and we apply the concept of chainosis atzmai even to a Persian. So in summary, we learned the concept of chainosis atzmai, a living thing, lifts himself, carries himself somewhat, and is not regarded as a masui when it comes to hoitzah Shabbos. We have machlekes. According to the Rabbanon, this applies strictly to an adam, to a person. And as Tosfos points out, not to a small baby, so it's merely to an adam. However, a baby m'chai v'oif, and certainly anything which is tied up, will not have this concept applied to it. According to Reb Nosson, this concept applies not only to a person, but also to a baby m'chai v'oif, but not if these things are tied up. In that case, they don't have the ability to lighten themselves, to lift themselves. They are regarded as an ordinary standard load, and if one carries them on Shabbos, he has done hoitzah. Continues the Gemara, Es ha-meis b'mita chayev. The Mishnah tells us if one carries out a mace, and a mita is chayev v'chen kazayis min ha-meis. This is in accordance with the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that even a malacha which is not of a constructive nature is a malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa. It's not needed for its own purpose, its own sake. He's merely removing tumah. He's ridding himself of something unwanted and undesirable. That is considered to be a malacha and is chayev. Reb Shimon, however, disagrees. Reb Shimon says, in this case, he would be pater, because is it a malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa? It's not needed for its own sake. It's not achieving a higher purpose. It's not a constructive malacha. Says the Gemara, Omar Rabba, Bar Chana, Omar Rav Yochanan, ve'Omar Rav Yosef, Omar Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Pater hay Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon exempted, he patered even after moitzi as a mace l'kover, even if one should carry out the mace for the purpose of taking for burial, that too is not considered to be a proper malacha according to Reb Shimon. Let's take a look at Rashi inside who explains this. Rashi up on the first line, beginning with the words after moitzi as a mace l'kover, where the purpose here is not only to rid oneself of the tumah, to remove the tumah, but there is a constructive purpose as well. The mace here is going to have a benefit. The object, so to speak, is going to benefit from this act of carrying. Even in this case, as the Gemara, Reb Shimon exempts, he says it's still considered to be Eina Tzricha L'Gufa, because we look at the person. The person does not have any constructive goal, purpose. He's not personally benefiting from this haitzah, and therefore he is pater. Says Rashi, V'loi tema, don't think, Loi patar, ela b'manicha l'chutz. Don't think that Reb Shimon only exempts, only is pater in a case where he's simply taking the mace outside to leave him outside, in which case, ein tzorech Loi l'gufa shel moitzi, there's no benefit for the person, V'loi l'gufa shel haitzah, nor for the object. That in that case, there is no benefit at all, not on the personal side, not on the side of the on account of the chayfetz itself. The chiddush is no. Even in this case where there is benefit going to be derived for the mace itself, it is the object that is being carried out. Nevertheless, Reb Shimon says it's pater, because what determines the status of this malacha, of this ma'aser itzah? It is the personal benefit. We look at the person doing it. Is he deriving any benefit? Is it considered to be something beneficial for him? Then he's chayiv. Otherwise, he's pater. So the chiddush here is, even if he's being moitzi the mace l'kovrei to bury it, it is still considered to be eina tzricha l'gufa, because the person carrying it does not derive any personal benefit from this ma'aser itzah. Amar Rava, umaydu Reb Shimon. However, Reb Shimon would agree in the following two cases that we consider it to be a malach. For instance, b'mar lachbar boy, if he carries out a shovel in order to dig with it, so he's going to have personal benefit from it. V'sefer Torah likris boy, carries out a sefer Torah to read from it. The chayev. Why? So a pshita, of course. So what's the chiddush here? If he's going to have personal benefit from it, why would you even consider this to be a malacha she'eina tzricha l'gufa? Pshita, of course. Dihi ha-nami malacha she'eina tzricha l'gufa hi. If you would propose theoretically that this as well is regarded as eina tzricha l'gufa and is pater, then you find nothing that is tzricha l'gufa. Ela malacha she'tzricha l'gufa l'Reb Shimon heichem ishkachasla. If these cases as well are considered to be not of constructive nature, then what is? What is, according to Reb Shimon, a malacha she'tzricha l'gufa? So what is the chiddush here? Why is Rav need to teach us this chiddush here, that when he carries the shovel or the sefer Torah, even Reb Shimon would agree that he's chayiv? Of course. Says the Gemara, not so fast. Perhaps I would say, perhaps according to Reb Shimon, we only treat it as a malacha she'tzricha l'gufa if there's a double benefit here. Both the person doing the malacha and the object itself will benefit from this malacha. L'gufa, he has something from it. L'gufa, the object has something from it. Kigoy, for instance, mar lasisle tas v'lachbar. Why is he carrying out this shovel? To repair it, to place a tas, is a plate of metal on its tip, to repair it. She's taking it out for repairs, v'lachbar, and also to dig with it. So there's a double benefit here. The chayfetz has something from it, and the person has something from it. Or in the case of a sefer Torah lahagia, to edit it, to repair it. and then to read from it. So there's a double benefit here. The person has a benefit. The chayfetz, the object, will benefit from it. Perhaps only in that case do we treat it as a malacha shetzirich lugufa. Kamash malan. Therefore, Rava teaches us that's not the case. We don't need it to be for that extent. We don't need to be providing benefit for the person and for the object. Rather, it is the person who determines the status. If it is going to aid and benefit the person, that is enough and sufficient, and it is regarded as a malacha shetzirich lugufa. So once again, according to Reb Shimon, a malacha she'ena tzrich l'gufa is not considered to be a malachas machshavas, and he's pater. But what determines? It is the person that determines. If he has personal benefit from it, we consider it to be a constructive malacha, and he's chayiv. The fact that the object, for instance, has benefit, that is not sufficient. We need that the person should have benefit, and only then do we regard it as a malacha she'tzrich l'gufa. Continues the Gemara, who's shichva? There was this corpse, this mace. That person, the Ava B'derukras, who was present in this town, Derukras, Shara Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak la'fuke l'karmelis. So Rashi says he was, the mace was in a unpleasant situation, unpleasant location. It was a degrading situation. It was a bizayin, either in the sun or bidleika near fire. So they needed to change its locations. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak allowed them to remove the mace and take it out to a karmelis, which is not a rishus rabim or rishus hayachid, it is a rishus rabbanon. Amalei Rav Yochanan Achva. So Rav Yochanan challenged him. Rechon was the brother Achva the Marbrei the Ravana. He challenged the Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. He says, how could you allow one to carry out a mace from rishus hayachid to a karmelis? Come to Reb Shimon? Are you following Shittas Reb Shimon, who holds that carrying out a mace is not considered to be a true malacha because it's in its tzrich l'gufa? Eima the pater Reb Shimon b'chiv chatas. Reb Shimon only exempts from a chatas. He says it's not a malacha deraisa. Isur d'rabbanan me'ikav. Certainly, they said d'rabbanan. So how can you allow this l'chatchila? Reb Shimon says a malacha she'en tzrich l'gufa is pater, meaning he doesn't need to bring a carbon, but it's awesome with d'rabbanan. Amalei. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak responded, Holikim, this is a lashon of a swearing of a shvur. The Eilas Bayat, you yourself are going to go there and carry out this mace. Vafilu Rav Yehuda Shari. I allowed, even in the case where Rav Yehuda would allow, meaning Rav Yehuda who holds that a malacha she'ena tzricha gufa is indeed a malacha. My ruling followed even Rav Yehuda's most stringent approach. I wasn't following Rav Shimon's approach. Did I then say that one can carry the mace from Rishus Yachid to Rishus Rabim, which is a Hitzah min HaTorah? Karmelis Kamina. I was simply speaking about a karmelis to allow transfer from a Rishus Yachid to a karmelis, which is only a Rishus Rabbanon. Why? Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who considers carrying a mace from one Rishus to the other as a bona fide malacha, as a malacha deraisa, because he holds that a malacha she'en tzrich l'gufa is considered to be a malacha, even according to him, I allowed, because I allowed merely to a karmelis. Gadol kvod habriyos. Human dignity is great, is so big, is held in such high esteem. Shadoyich es loisa shebetorah has the ability to push away, to do away with a loisa say in the Torah. What type of loisa are we speaking about? Rashi says the law of loisasor. Torah tells us to not to stray from the words of the scholars of Chachamim. So this is the basis for the Surim, the Rabbanon. So what he meant to say was that I allowed, on account of Kavod HaBriyos, to protect the dignity of this mace, who was mutal bebizayin, was lying in bizayin, near a fire or in bachama under the sun. So I allowed a Issa Rabbanon to be pushed away. I allowed him to be carried from a Rishus Hayachid merely to a karmelis, which is only Issa Rabbanon, on account of Kavod HaBriyos. Therefore, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said it's unrelated to the discussion of Malacha She'en Tzricha Gufa between Machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and Shimon. I was mat even according to Rabbi Yehuda, even though Malacha She'en Tzricha Gufa is a Malacha. I simply allowed it to be carried from Rishus Hayachid to a karmelis on account of Kavod HaBriyos. Now, what about this? So Muktzah Rashi says they would put something on it, a kikar, loaf of bread, or a tinaik. This was a method allowed to carry a mace in these circumstances. Continues the Gemara. Tanan Asam. So we learned in a Mishnah in the Goyim, hatoilish simoni tuma. So if one has a nega, now there are various simonim, signs of tumah, of impurity in the nega. For instance, 2 white hairs which are growing in the nega, or a michya. Michya is a small piece of naturally colored flesh which is present in this nega, this white blotch which is tameh. So these are examples of 2 types of simoni tumah, which due to the presence of these things, the nega is tameh. Says the Mishnah, we know that the pasuk says he shomer b'nega tzaras. Rashi brings this is the lav, where the Torah tells a person, be careful, don't remove the simoni tumah from your nega. You must keep it as is. So if a person is toilish simoni tumah, says the Mishnah, toilish simoni tumah, if one removes the white hair in his nega, if he takes a michya, which is the naturally colored looking flesh, and he's koiva michya, he burns it. By doing so, he removes the status of the tumah from the michya, and he removes the status of tumah from his nega. Oiver b'loisase. He's over this lav where the Torah prohibits one from removing the simon tumah from his nega. Says the Gemara, Itmar, we learned, achas mishtayim chayiv. What if one has 2 white hair in his nega, and he removes one of those 2 hair, chayiv? He is chayiv because the only way the hair is metame is if there are 2 there. So if he removes one of 2, he is removing the simon tumah, and therefore he's chayiv. What about if there are 3? There are 3 white hair. Achas misholish. So he removes only one of those 3, and there are still 2 remaining. Now 2 are sufficient to endow this nega with tumah. So what is the halacha there? Rav Nachman Amar chayiv. In this case as well, he's chayiv. Rav Sheshes Amar pater. He didn't do anything. The nega is still tameh. Rav Nachman Amar chayiv. Why? Ahani ma'asav. Because he accomplished something. What did he accomplish? Di mishtakal chad achriti. So by removing number 1 of 3, what's going to happen? Now he brought it closer to tahara. Di mishtakal chad achriti. Because if the next one will be removed, azla tumah will disappear. So he brought it a step closer to tahara. By removing number 1 of 3, he is enabling the nega to become tar when the next one will be removed. So he brought it a step closer, and that is sufficient to make him liable, to make him chayav. Rav Sheshes Amar pater. We look at the current situation. Hashta miyas ha'isel tumah. Now, at this point in time, hashta miyas ha'isel tumah. Certainly their tumah is still present. He didn't do anything. He didn't accomplish anything. Amar Rav Sheshes, Mana aminala. Where do I find my concept? The snan, we learned in our Mishnah. The snan, as we learned, v'chein kezayis min hameis, v'kezayis min havel chayla. Mishnah says, if one carries out a kezayis of a mace, a kezayis of an nevela, he's chayev because he got rid of the tumah. Apparently, chatzi zayis, if he merely carries out only a half of a zayis of the mace or the nevela, he's pater. He didn't do anything. V'atanya, but we learned in another brayso, chatzi zayis chayev. If one should carry out only a half a zayis, he is chayev. So we seem to have a contradiction between the brayso, which says chayiv even on a half a zayis, and the diuk of our Mishnah, which seems to say that he's pater. So how are we going to reconcile this contradiction? My love, apparently, hadasani chayiv, the brayso which says chayiv even on a half, we're speaking about a case where the apik chatzi zayis mikazayis. When there was a kazayis present, there was an olive volume of the nevela present. When he removed a half, took it outside, he removed the tumah, because at this point it's only a half a zayis, which is not sufficient to be matame. So you accomplished something. Therefore, it is considered to be a significant act of Eitzah and Yischayev. So that's the pshat in the brayso. V'ha desnan pater. However, from our Mishnah, where we imply that he's pater by carrying out only half a zayis, apparently we're speaking about the afik chatzi zayis mikazayis merza. When there was 1.5 kazayis there, more than necessary, and he only carried out a half, leaving a full zayis behind. He didn't do anything. He didn't accomplish anything. So although he brought it closer to tahara, because he removed the first of the 3 half of Kazaisim here. There was 1 half, he removed a half. So he brought it closer. He brought the process 1 step closer to Tahara. We look at the present moment, there's no accomplishment, therefore he's Pater. So this is a source, Rav Shesh's Shita, we focus on the present. For Rav Nachman will respond, Idi v'idi chayiv. In both cases, he will be chayiv. Meaning, whether he actually did something or he brought it a step closer, he will be chayiv. Meaning, let's say there was a zayis and he took out a half. By doing so, he diminished the shear, is chayiv. If there was 1.5 and he removed a half, he brought it 1 step closer. At this point in time, even if just a little bit, just a minute amount will be removed, it would diminish the shear. In this case as well, he's chayiv, because he brought it to that point. By removing that half of kazayis from the 1.5, he brought it very close to Tahara. At this point, only a minute amount is necessary to remove to be mitar. Therefore, according to Rav Nachman, in both cases, it's chayiv. But it's not pater. However, the halacha on the Mishnah, which seems to imply that he's pater, is speaking about the apik chatzi zayis. Mimeis gadol. He carried out a half a zayis from a large mace. So there was a large amount of tumah there. He didn't bring it a step closer. He just took out a half a zayis. There was still so much more remaining. So much more needs to be taken out to minimize to remove the shear, to remove the tumah. Therefore, it's not regarded as though he accomplished anything. I'm only speaking about a case where he actually brought it very close to Tahara. For instance, in the case where we have the 3 hair, he ripped out 1 hair, leaving only 2 behind. At this point, he brought it very close to Tahara because all we need is to remove the next hair. Or in a case where he had 1.5 zayis of tumah, and he took out a half, leaving only 1 behind. At this point, all he needs to do is take 1 little bit, and he accomplishes. So he brought it so close. But when you have a large amount of tumah there, and he only takes out a half of a zayis, he didn't do anything, he didn't accomplish anything, and certainly he's pater. So in summary, if a person should carry out a half a zayis of tumah, so Rav Nachman says, well, if he took the half a zayis from the pre-existing kazayis, he diminished the shear, and he's chayiv, he accomplished something. Rav Nachman says as well, that if there was a kazayis umechza, 1.5, and he took out a half, he brought it so close to Tahara, and therefore he accomplished something, he's chayiv. If it is mimeis gadol, he's pater. Rav Sheshis maintains, the only way he's chayiv, if there was a kazayis there, and now, by taking out that half a zayis, he removed the shear of tumah. Only in that case he's chayiv, but in the other cases he's pater, because we look at the present moment. If he accomplished something at the present moment, he's chayiv. But the fact that he brought it closer to eventual tahara, that is not sufficient to be mechayiv. Continues the Mishnah, if one uses his nails to trim his other nails, or trims them using his teeth, or uses his hands to trim his hair, or his mustache, his beard, a woman who braids her hair on Shabbos, or applies eye paint, layers her hair in a specific fashion. Reb Lezer Machayev, in all these cases, Reb Lezer says they are considered to be a true malacha d'oraisa, and he is chayiv v'chatas. V'chachamim, they say no, these are not regarded as malachas d'oraisa, merely they are asam d'rabbanan mishum shvus. Shvus means meant to rest, refrain, so they are isuri d'rabbanan. Says the Gemara, Amar Reb Lezer. Let's go back to the beginning of our Mishnah. So if one trims his nails or his hair using his hands, according to the Chachamim, it's not considered to be the customary way of doing it. It's not the ordinary way, the derech of doing it, and therefore it's not considered to be a malacha d'oraisa. Reb Lezer maintains no. Apparently, he can still achieve proper results, and therefore it's considered to be a true malacha. Says the Gemara, Omer Reb Lezer, machlekes biyad. So this discussion is only strictly because he uses hands. Avo bekli, but if a person should use a kli, a utensil, to trim his nails or his hair, divrei hakol chayiv, all agree that he's chayiv because it's considered to be a teilad, a derivative of the malacha of goizes. Goizes means shearing the wool off the sheep. Here too, he's trimming something off the person. It's considered to be a malacha d'oraisa if he uses a kli. Says the Pshita, of course. Zu b'zu t'nan. The Mishnah is specifically speaking about using his nails to trim his other nails. Apparently, if he would use a kli, it would be considered to be a malacha according to all shittas. So what's the chiddush? Says the Gemara, Mauda Tema, perhaps I would think. Rabbanan v'kli nami patri. Even when using a kli contra Rabbanan, he is pater. V'hadei tani zu b'zu. Why does the Mishnah specifically describe him as using his nails? The Mishnah is trying to inform us the extent of Rabbi Elazar's opinion, that even when he doesn't use a kli, it's still considered to be a malacha. But that's not to say that if he would use a kli according to the Chachamim, it's a malacha. Kamash malon. Therefore, the Gemara needs to inform us, no, that if he would use a kli, that is regarded as a bona fide malacha, is a talad of goizes, and according to all shittis, he would be chay v'chatas. Continues the Gemara, V'amar Rabbi Elazar, machlokes la'atzmai. This discussion is only if he trims his own nails, his own hair. In that case, Rabbi Elazar will tell us that even if he uses his hands, it's considered to be a malacha because he can achieve proper results. But if he attempts to do it to his friend, they're called pater. Even Rabbi Elazar agrees it's not a malacha because he can't achieve proper results. He can't maneuver his hands properly to achieve proper results. It's not considered to be a proper malacha. Says once again, pshita, of course. It's obvious. It's a part of Tanan. The Mishnah specifically is describing it as Siparnav. He's trimming his own nails. Apparently, if he would be trimming somebody else's nails, all agree it's not a malacha. Says the Gemara, perhaps I would think, Rabbi Elazar would maintain even when he's doing it for somebody else, it's considered to be a proper malacha. Why then does the Mishnah state Siparnav, which implied that he's doing his own nails, to inform you the extent of Rabbanan's chiddush, that even in that case, they don't regard it as a malacha. But this is not to say that according to Rabbi Elazar, should he decide to do it l'chaveroi, and is any different, kamash malan. Therefore, the Gemara teaches us no, that Rabbi Elazar is only mechayev if he does it on his own. But if he does it l'chaveroi, even according to Rabbi Elazar, it's not a malacha. Continues the Gemara, v'chein sa'aroi. Tana, what is the shear of the malacha of sharing one's hair, of trimming one's hair? How many hair? Hanoitel maloi piazug chayv. If one trims maloi piazug, a shear of hair, which fills the piazug, the mouth, the tip of the scissors, he's chayv. So according to Rabbanan, when you use the kli, according to Rabbi Elazar, even using his hands. V'kama maloi piazug, so how much is that? Amrivida shtein, 2 hair. V'hatanya, but if we take a look at that same brisa, the brisa continues and says ulokarcha shtayim. The brisa says that lekarcha, meaning the isser of balding oneself, shaving one's hair, as an expression of mourning. How much hair is necessary for that isser? Shtayim, 2 hair. So apparently, this shear of 2 only applies to the isser of karcha, but not to the previously stated malacha of Shabbos. But it's one brisa. The brisa begins by saying hanoitem moi piazug chayiv, and continues lekarcha shtayim. So apparently this shtayim is only applied lekarcha and not to the former halacha of Shabbos. Ema says more read v'chein lekarcha shtayim. That indeed the shtayim goes back on the first halacha as well. That not only for karcha but also for Shabbos v'chein lekarcha shtayim. So the shtayim is applied to both, to Shabbos and to karcha. Tani nami hachi, we found this in the brisa as well. Hanoitem moi piazug b'Shabbos chayev. If one shears that amount of hair, is chayev. V'kama moi piazug, how much is there? Shtayim, 2 hair. So this is Tanakama who holds the malacha of trimming hair only applies to a minimum of 2 hair. Rabbi Elazar Omer achas, even 1 is sufficient to be considered a malacha. Umoidim chacham Rabbi Elazar, chacham will concede to Rabbi Elazar in the following case. So if one is picking white hair from within his black hair, in that case, shafilu achas chayiv. Even if he does only 1 hair, if he picks out only 1 white hair, he is chayiv. Why? Because that is considered to be a malacha chashuva. That's considered to be something significant because he's particular, even about 1 hair, even about 1 white hair. He wants to look young. So in that case, all agree that is sufficient shear for malacha. Continues the Gemara. V'davar zeh, you meant to know that this thing, even during ordinary weekdays, is asur. It's asur for a man to pick out white hair. Lo yilbash gever simlas isha. A man is not meant to wear a garment of an isha. He's not meant to involve himself in beautifying himself. That is considered to be a practice of women. Tanya Reb Shimon Lazoimer. Tziporen shapirish ruba. If a person has a nail which has become mostly detached from his body, v'tzitzin. So these are these little loose strands of flesh around his nail, these cuticles. V'tzitzin shapirish ruban. That they have also come apart, detached from the person. So if most of the tziporen has come apart, come detached from the person, and most of this strand of flesh was pierced from the person, then biyad mutter, a person may remove them using his hands. B'kli chayev chatas. If he uses a utensil, he's chayev chatas. It's a malacha. Says the Gemara, how can you present such a wide spectrum, such a wide extreme? Mika midi the b'kli chayev chatas. Is there such a thing that doing something with a kli involves a chayev chatas? It's a malacha deraisa. Ubiyad mutter l'chatchila, and you allow him to use his hands even l'chatchila. Generally, the Chachamim would make a gzera, would not allow him using his hands, lest he come do an issa deraisa using a kli. So how can you say on the one hand using a kli is a malacha deraisa and using his hands is mutter l'chatchila? Says Marhachi Kama, this is what he meant to say. Pirshu ruban. So if most of them became detached, biyad mutter, he can use his hands l'chatchila. B'kli patur aval asur. So indeed, using a kli does not involve a malacha deraisa. It's asur d'Rabbanan, but certainly it's patur from mechatas. So that explains things. So if a kli is issa d'Rabbanan, they allowed using his hands. Loi pirshu ruban. However, if the nail or these strands of flesh were not mostly detached from the body, biyad patur aval asur. In that case, it can involve a malacha deraisa. If he uses his hands, it's asur d'Rabbanan. Patur aval asur. B'kli chayev chatas. If he should use a kli in this case, it's considered to be a malacha of goizes, and it's chayev chatas. But in any case, if they've come apart, they're detached from the body, ruban mostly detached, in this case, he may use his hands. It is mutter l'chatchil. Omar v'yudah halacha Reb Shimon Lazar. Indeed, that is the halacha. Omar Rav Chanan Reb Yochanan. This allowance is only v'hu shepirshu klapi mal. This allowance to pull off these strands of flesh, it's only if they've become detached klapi mal, upward towards the body. They cause him pain. In that case, Chacham allowed him to remove these strands using his hands. And as the Farshim say that, likewise regarding the nail, if it's become mostly detached from the body and it is causing him a tsar, he's allowed to remove it using his hands. So in summary, what if one trims his nails or trims his hair using a kli? All agree that there's a chiv chatas. Now what is the shear of trimming hair? At least two hair. Or in the case of one white hair from amongst black ones, even one is sufficient for a malacha for chiv chatas. What if he uses his hands? If he uses his hands trimming his own nails or hair, according to Blazer, there's a chiv chatas. According to Chavim, it is only a d'Rabbanan. What happens if he is trimming his friends' hair or nails using his own hands? According to all shittas, he is patur, and apparently the Mepharshim say this applies not only to trimming nails, but also to trimming his friend's hair. Okay, time for a brief chazara of today's daf. We began with the Mishnah, which told us that if one should carry out oichlin less than a shiur in a kli, not only is he patur for the oichlin, he's patur for the kli as well, because the kli is tafel. It is secondary to the content, and it is not significant. It is not reckoned with. The Brisa told us if he carries a oichel kishir in a kli, he's chayiv on the oichlin, but he's not chayiv on the kli, unless he specifically needs the kli out there. He's tzarech. In that case, he's chayiv not only on the food, but on the container as well. We learned the concept of chayneshes atzmai. A living thing lifts itself, it lightens itself. It's not considered to be a standard load. According to Rabbanan, this applies only to a person. According to Rab Nassan, to a behemoth, a chayiv as well. All agree that if it is kafas tied up, it's considered to be a load. We learned that if there was a kazayas of tumah, and he removes half of the zayis, by doing so he diminishes the shear. All agree that he's chayiv. It's considered to be a hitzah chashuva. He accomplished something. What if there was a kazayis and a half, and he only removed a half of zayis? According to Rav Nachman, in this case as well, he's chayiv because he brought the process closer to tahara. All you need now is to remove just a little bit. and to accomplish tahara, according to Rav Sheshes. At the present moment, he hasn't accomplished anything because he left the kazayis behind. He's pater. We like to machlokes into Rav Lezer and Rabbanan. If a person trims his nails or his hair using his hands, according to Rav Lezer, it's a malacha. According to Chum, he's pater. It's only Issa Rabbanan. All agree if he uses a kli, it's considered to be a malacha. And all agree that if he does it l'chaver to his friend, even Rav Lezer agrees that using his hands to do that for his friend is not considered to be a malacha. It's only an Issa Rabbanan.